You touched on the yin and the yang, and I've had some beautiful conversations on the podcast prior about that, but how do you sort of use that as a way to gain more understanding of the cycles and also the masculine and the feminine? I'd love to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I often think about the yin and the yang as like, for the overarching way to perceive it is that the yang, perhaps being the more masculine, is more outward focused. So there's like more output, and whereas the feminine is more input. Yeah. So if you literally think about, mess this up here.
You can move it around.
I'm just playing with the microphone. Yeah, so for the feminine, it's more inward. So it's like, are you giving or are you receiving? So the masculine or the more yang phases would be more about being able to give and have that outward focus, whereas the yin phases are more the receiving. Yeah, and so the giving actually comes to yourself, or the receiving from other people, receiving help or receiving just rest, you know, and the masculine being more of that action and like taking charge and making decisions and being clear and getting clarity and being able to take action on those, whereas the feminine would be more that rest and receiving clarity, in a sense of being able to just be more with yourself, like be rather than do, you know? And like, I think we live in a world that is very focused on the doing, and this probably corresponds to why we often reject the feminine cycle. But the thing is, we're called human beings. We're not called human doings. So if we never ever like, have I ever said that to you?
You have, but every time I hear it, it's like, yes.
Yeah, because it reminds us like we're not here just to do, we're here to be as well. And it's fun to do things, and it's fun to take action and put the things out that we want in the world. But if we never take time for the being, how can it be truly like integrated and embodied and in alignment and in balance with who we are? Like, we need a balance of the both. And I think in relationship, like talking about the masculine and feminine, you know, we find the balance of like when you know, I prefer to be more in my more yin feminine state. That's just how I like to be, more watery being. And you prefer to be more in your yang state. So that works the polarity between us. But sometimes there are times when you want to be more yin, and I can take notice of that and be like, okay, how can I step into my yang? Or there's times that I want to be more yang and maybe you step in your yin. Or if I'm working with clients, I want to be more yang so that they can be more yin, you know? And so that makes it most of the other time I just want to be in my yin space. So thanks for being the right match for me in that. But yeah, it's just being able to embrace those different polarities and work with them. They could be different to different people. Like, there are always like, something that it's making me think of is like, there are always different reasons and scenarios about things. Like, you can Google them and be like, oh, what is divine feminine and what is divine masculine? And there are things that you read in that resonate. But there's also a level of just being able to trust what feels more nourishing and more yin to you, and what feels more, you know, exciting and yang as the opposite. Trust what the messages that you get. It might be different to me. It depends how detached you are from your own self, I guess, as to whether those answers are maybe truly helping you. But the more that you listen to that inner compass, the more that you can identify what those things are.
Yeah, it's also the balance of how extreme you are in your yin or your yang or your masculine or your feminine.
Yeah.
You know, if you're like really always in your masculine and doing and in that yang state, and maybe it's really extreme, maybe you're running ultra marathons all day and running a multi-million-dollar business and doing all these things, then the yin to balance that out perhaps doesn't need to be the complete most yin exercise in existence, right? Like, maybe it can just at least have something to sort of balance that out to some degree.
Yeah. And everyone's different. And like, I identify with being a female and I connect with my more feminine essence. So I'm probably going to want to be sitting in that space more, but you identify as a male and in your more masculine essence. So you can probably stay more in that masculine phase, but everyone has both the yin and yang within them. It's just the amounts that vary between each human, and the noticing, like, if you are bleeding with the feminine cycle and you relate to any of this stuff, like, how can I bring in more of that yin, especially for years, if you have rejected your cycle or haven't allowed yourself to be embodied in your feminine.
It's really hard it comes back to culture. Like we said at the start, our culture has dictated that the cycle, the female cycle and periods are almost taboo.
Or a hindrance.
Or a pain, or they're in the way. And it's the same thing in terms of doing. You have to be doing something. You have to be achieving.
Yeah.
You have to be productive.
Yeah.
And so then when you don't do that, it's confronting for some people.
Because then it comes back to, it's like, why are you doing? Like, are you doing because you feel like you have to prove yourself, or are you doing because if you feel like you're not doing something, you're not enough, or you're not, as productive as you could be? Like, how can you be comfortable with being? And that's like, I mean, I've listened to Brendan's podcast really recently that you had him on, and it's just, there was so much wisdom in that around like being able to step into that being state. And it's so important. And we live in a world that hasn't perhaps taught us that in the past. And so it's no wonder that we shy away from those more feminine being states, because what happens when you're in a being state is your shit comes up, You and I know this from, being in being state for long periods of time at once as well. Like, that's hard, because then all your stuff comes up and there's no distractions. Like, even when we're in our week to week, month to month cycle, whatever, you might go in your being state and be like, oh, I don't want to go there. I'm just going to watch some Netflix to rest instead. Right. But like, what if you just sat there with yourself and like really got into that being state?
Oh, that's scary.
But like, that's like, how can you get to that, But at the beginning, sometimes it's just being able to just switch off. And I mean, putting down screens is always a good way to really rest and allow things to come up. But if you go all the time and you need that to chill out, then do that. At least get to that part of being in yin to begin with.
I always find it so fascinating observing myself, but also others, when talking about fasting. Because when you fast on water and you do it properly, you don't do anything. And people are so curious. But what do you do, Alex?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Wow, well, you just get up and then you kind of sit in a chair, and then you might have your eyes open for a few hours, and then you might close your eyes for a few hours, and you sip water, and then all of a sudden it's 7 o'clock at night and you do a half-hour meditation, then you go to bed. And that is just
foreign,
jarring, foreign. And people ask, but so what? No phones?
Yeah.
No. Oh, do you read? No, I don't really read. So what do you do? You don't do.
Yeah, you're a human being.
Yeah. And
I've noticed that too. It's like they're so concerned with like you never ask someone, oh, how have you been? How are you being? Like, how are you just being in day to day? It's always, what are you doing?
So true. I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's this culture, it's this world that we're in, which is why it's so challenging. I find that a lot. Building a business over the last 4 or 5 years, right? And then you get to a point where you need to rest. And so
or it's forced upon you.
Yeah, it's forced upon you. Yes, yeah. And in my case, it was forced upon me by migraines if I was working too much.
Yeah.
Too stressed, doing. And then at one point my body's like, okay, well, you're just going to keep doing, so I'm going to stop you from doing.
Yeah.
Cop this migraine for the next 6 hours.
Yeah, and I'm sure so many like women can relate to like when their period does come, or like the day before, they fall in a heap. They get cramps, they get headaches, they get migraines. They just have all these physical symptoms come up, and it's like, if you're experiencing all these physical symptoms, why is this happening again and again and again? Because have you taken any time for being that month or honoring yourself? And when you do you notice a difference?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So how do you balance the being and the doing? That seems like if we answer that question, I feel like we become millionaires. Like how do you balance that out, and how do you keep a gauge of knowing when you're doing too much? Like what are some of the signals, and then how do you know if you're being too much? What are the signals for that?
Yeah, it's hard because there's so many different like slight variations of like when you speak about like how do you know if you're being too much, for example, like you could feel really stagnant. You could feel like a lot of stuckness kind of come up, but that could also still happen if you're being too yang. Yeah. I think it's like, how can we get into our bodies in our fullness and integrate our wombs, our hearts and our minds? And even if you're a male, you still have a celestial womb and that area of your being. How can we get into that space? So like get really grounded and really like in balance in who we are so that we can actually listen to the cues, because every person is different. And when we're all up in our head all the time, that can be when we're stuck in the doing phase, because when we're in our head, we maybe disassociate from our body and then we can't really listen to the cues that our body's giving us to tell us to slow down. Yeah. So it's even like one of the key things that I suggest to people is like, how can you bring more mindfulness into your day and more awareness into your day? Even just by when you go to a new place, just taking your surroundings and opening up your awareness and opening up your mindfulness more, because in that moment, it reminds you, oh, I'm not just a mind like da-da-da-da-da going whatever it is. It's like, oh, I'm actually here in my body. Or every time you put your seatbelt on, it's fun that, you have that movement and putting your seatbelt on and you just take a moment and taking a breath. And so like breathing is a really big aspect of it. But for like, we're so lucky as for the female side of the race to be able to use our cycles to tell us when we could be more yang and more yin. Males go through a much different cycle and can be much quicker. But you can still correspond with the moon. But perhaps when you go through things quicker, so it's like more of like a 24 to 48 cycle. I'm not very well versed on it. But for females, it's really easy to be able to just work with your cycle to begin with and see where that takes you. When you are feeling that you're being too yang, you'll notice you'll fall in a heap, or you'll get home from work and you'll just be like dead. I mean, you were experiencing this when you were building your businesses. And then when I was talking about playing with this yin and yang, the thing I really noticed it the most was when Alex used to get home from work after he'd been like slogging away all day and being a bit stressed as well, that I knew that he just needed to be in his yin. And I would be like, come here. And I would just like be in my yang and hold you and support you, and then like make you dinner and those sorts of things that I knew that will allow you to not have to like do anything, or even like really have to make any decisions. That seems to relate for me. And then when you're being too yin and you're feeling like you're a couch potato and you can't get off and you're feeling like lethargic and stuck, I would suggest looking into like your values and the things that you want to attract into your life and thinking about like what your goals are, because then that can help you to get off the couch with motivation. Because sometimes it can come back to not feeling motivated when we kind of perceive as like when we're being too yin, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I'd like to add to that too, I think that's a really good, I think you kind of laid that out quite well. And one thing I wanted to add with regard to that motivation right at the end is that you don't have to be motivated to take action.
No.
And in fact, sometimes you need to take action even when you're not motivated, because when you take action, you'll get some form of result.
Yeah.
And then that result will inspire you and motivate you to continue to take action again.
Yeah, it's that triangle. But also like sometimes all the action that you need to take is just going out in nature. Because nature inspires us the most often. And when we're so detached from nature is when we can't get inspiration from it. But if you go out there and you be present in nature and feel your feet on the earth and notice the butterfly flying past you and noticing the way that the trees connect together, that neutralizes your nervous system anyway. But also it can really allow you to gain, okay, clarity of like your being. Take a journal out and go and sit in a forest somewhere, go to the beach. You know, you always feel revitalized after you've been out in nature. Yeah. Because it allows you to get back to that state of like more equilibrium. And then you can decide, okay, do I need a rest now? Did I work out too hard in nature and I need to just have a rest now? Or am I inspired and I can take action, write down my values and my goals, and how can I align my life with those things?
Mm-hmm. There's a really nice theme of balance happening here.
Yeah.
And I remember I heard someone say, or maybe it was a little while ago, you know, like work-life balance was this thing, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. And then someone said, you know what, work-life balance is bullshit. It doesn't actually exist. And part of me thought, you know, I kind of get where they're going with that because, I mean, how do you really find this balance? But, you know, I think, no, you just need to work on it.
Yeah.
Whether it's work-life balance or whether it's yin-yang balance.
Yeah.
It's just having balance in your life, and being connected in with nature is probably the best way to find that equilibrium.
Nature gives us all the lessons and all the answers, but we just forget to look at her.
How do you define the difference between being and being in that yin state and being present?
The difference between the two?
Yeah.
So are you meaning like you could be being but still not fully being present with yourself?
Yeah, you could be in a yin state but you could be not present. Or is that not possible?
This is no, it is possible, but where it takes me is that let's talk about meditation for a second. Yeah, you're trying to get in a more being state generally when you're meditating. Yeah, but you can do a more masculine meditation or a more feminine meditation. Yeah, there's like, you know, we could do an overarching like this is yin and this is yang, but then within like all the yin there's yin yang like subcategories. Yeah, or maybe you could see yoga as being more yin, but there's more yang yoga and more yin yoga. Yeah, there's literally yin yoga. Yes. Yeah. And so the other yoga is actually more yang. Yeah? But maybe it helps you get into that yin state, but the real true yin state is almost like nothingness, you know. To sound like Brendan when I say that, you know, that nothingness, or Richard Rudd.
Numbness.
That numbness and that nothingness of just being able to be and allow the things to come up as they come up. Because most of us in the Western world, I would assume, have never truly gotten to that space of just being and fully being without things coming up, because we're constantly in a state of avoiding that being. Yeah. So when we actually get to that being, then we have to deal with all the things coming up. And so there's a little bit of like you're in a more yin state, fully in your being, but do you ever fully get to yin? True yin? I don't know.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that, because things have come up and you need to take action to deal with those things.
But then there's also like, I know in more Eastern cultures, like I love working with tea, and there's two different types of tea in the lineage that I've learned. One lives in a bowl, sort of, which is to create more equanimity. So it's actually to help you to get a little bit more yin and just be like, the mantra is everything is perfect. So how can I just perceive everything in every moment as perfect, and finding that balance and that stillness within that. But then when you're cultivated that too much, you do gong fu, which is creating more, which I haven't learned, but there's a simplicity about it, but it's also actually activating your brain so that you have to remember the perfect sequence of the way that you're meant to do things. So I think that's really beautiful, but within both, there's still yin and yang, you know, within everything. You know, it's like you see the yin yang symbol. Like it's not just yin, there's the yin within the yang and then the yang within the yin. And so that's where it is. And that's why, you know, even talking about the seasons, and like if you're in summer, you might still have a winter day, and that's okay. It's like, stop trying to force your life to be a certain way, and maybe just listen to your body and allow yourself to be with that, whatever's coming up that day.